Today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a different video where I discuss my top 10 favorite authors of all time so far as of mid-2023. Starting off the list at number 10, William Shakespeare. So what can I say about him? A lot has been said. He's one of the greatest writers of all time. In Harold Bloom's Invention of the Human, to paraphrase him, he effectively said that Shakespeare wrote the Bible of how to be a human, and that is what we get. His plays are still being produced today from when they were written over 4 centuries ago. You can't say that about a lot of writers, a lot of authors. I personally have only acted in Othello for a full stage production, but have done numerous scenes and monologues from many of his other works. You don't need me to tell you how good Shakespeare is. You probably already know. I also love books with references to Shakespeare. Station 11 is a notable recent book made into a show on HBO, I want to say, where production of Lear features prominently, as do Macbeth and Hamlet throughout the course of the novel. Phenomenal read. My favorite works of Shakespeare are his 4 major tragedies, but I also have big love for the comedies and of the histories, particularly King John, especially when those are performed at the Stratford Shakespeare Festival in Ontario. Coming in at number 9, G. Willow Wilson, an American Muslim graphic novelist and novelist who's probably best known today for her work with Marvel in relaunching Miss Marvel with the character Kamala Khan. I first read her work Air, which is a graphic novel series about flight, multi-factional battles, multiversal travels. It's a whole mishmash of things. Her stuff is largely considered magical realism. I've also read Cairo, which is her first full graphic novel and is just awesome. The way she weaves narrative throughout the imagery in that one, spectacular. Her novel Aleph the Unseen is on my TBR list, and I can't wait to get into that one. Next up, number 8, Philip K. Dick. He's most notable for having written a number of novels that have now been made into films, such as Blade Runner, Minority Report, Scanner Darkly, Paycheck. Scanner Darkly is probably my favorite of all of those. Beyond that, his novel Man in the High Castle has been made into an Amazon series that is incredibly well done. I read Valis right after I finished my undergrad, and it's the first sci-fi that I read which I felt truly incorporated mysticism well. I loved that one. His work may not be for everyone, but if you enjoyed any of those films that I mentioned, you might just enjoy his novels and short stories that they're based on. Number 7, Neil Gaiman. His work is what reawakened my love for prose fiction and all of its many subgenres after many years of required reading throughout my education. His stories are a breath of fresh air, and he is what I would consider to be a true master of the graphic novel and fantasy genres. Now, at this point, his great work, The Sandman, has been made into a Netflix series, and also a Audible original dramatization read by a number of celebrities, many of whom you may be familiar with. And through these new mediums, I feel that his work is beginning to get the more widespread mainstream recognition that it deserves after spending a number of decades in semi-obscurity. I mean, The Sandman was always popular, but it's getting out there more now, and it truly deserves it. His other works, American Gods, Stardust, Coraline, Mirror Mask, Good Omens, and Lucifer, have also been adapted for the screen at this point. So you can understand that he's pretty widely popular, and you don't need me to continue to spend more time singing his praises than I already have. At number 6, Gary Snyder and Alan Watts. Yes, it's a 2-for-1. These two gentlemen are some of the most influential Western Buddhist writers of the 60s that have done as much or possibly more than many of their Beat Generation counterparts to bring Mahayana Buddhism and Zen specifically to Americans and broader Western audiences. Gary Snyder is the lesser known of the two, and largely a poet and essayist whose writings on environmentalism, for me, those tracts are some of the most profound writings in the canon of American environmentalism. He won the Pulitzer Prize in 1975 for his work Turtle Island. His essay collections A Place in Space and Back on the Fire are illuminating poetic works in and of themselves and a credit to our American environmental consciousness. At the time of this recording, he is still kicking it up in NorCal at the age of 92. If you want a quick taste, check out his Smokey the Bear Sutra, which is just refreshing and enlightening. More prominent and well-known is Alan Watts, a British expat who settled in San Francisco on a houseboat in Sausalito, to be specific, I believe, and whose body of work gave the Beat poets a basis in Asian religious traditions, and he later helped launch the hippie movement in the United States. If you're not familiar with him, most likely you have heard his voice sampled from his lectures, largely in lo-fi beats or in aesthetic TikToks or YouTube videos. If you're looking for a quick, fun intro to his thinking, check out The Wisdom of Insecurity. Number 5, Gabrielle Zevin. If you watched my earlier video, you knew she was going to show up on here for how much I've enjoyed her work. I have only read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, but doing so has motivated me to check out more of her works, specifically The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, which I believe has been made into a Netflix movie, or maybe a Hulu movie or something like that as well. I haven't seen it either, but I would want to read the book first. It's a testament to the quality of her writing that the one book has launched her into the middle of my top 10 list. It's current, relevant, with real, authentic characters who have well-developed emotional lives full of pain and truth and little victories. If you haven't heard of her or haven't seen my other video, do yourself a favor and go read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow right now. Number 4, C.S. Lewis, the novelist who started me reading real books and graduating me from reading children's books as a youngster. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is legendary. You don't need me to tell you that. You may have seen some of the film adaptations from the BBC back in the 80s, I think it's the 80s, or maybe the more recent film adaptations from Disney in the mid to late 2000s. Loved those stories. Read all 7 of the Chronicles of Narnia, but with full transparency, I have not read his other non-fiction works like A Grief Observed or Mere Christianity, although I know those are popular to interested readers. At number 3, Brandon Sanderson. And admittedly, I've been aware of Sanderson for quite a while as the novelist who finished Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series, but for one reason or another, his own works just never caught my attention until about a year ago when I had learned that he had created the most successful Kickstarter campaign of all time for 4 books that he's launching in 2023. That got my interest. And so I figured I'd give him a shot with Mistborn, the first book in that series, The Final Empire. All of the fantasy elements that he brought into play with his world building, and particularly the magical combat, were incredible. So Naturally, I had to read the other two Mistborn books to complete the original trilogy there, and that just left me wanting more. And I'd heard that the Stormlight Archive series was somewhat more critically acclaimed, so figured that I'd give that a go. And what a phenomenal decision that was. I started reading the first book in that series, The Way of Kings, and that made me just fall in love with his writing. He's most renowned in his writing for developing these complex yet coherent, deeply unique magical systems. I'd consider him a true modern master of the fantasy genre, and I cannot wait to see what he brings to the table in the years to come. I'm finishing Oathbringer, the third book in the series right now, and think it's just fantastic. If this has piqued your curiosity, do be forewarned that these books are quite lengthy, but have no fear. He does have a pretty good one-shot, Warbreaker. This one is much shorter, and really good in its own right. Number 2, Jack Kerouac. Now, he is probably the most well-known, famous Beat Generation writer in American discourse, and for good reason, but at the same time, I do still think he is too often overlooked. After I learned meditation in college and started a study of Buddhism, I picked up a copy of his book, The Subterraneans, and loved his style specifically. After reading that, it made me want to read The Dharma Bums, and after I was finished reading that, I knew I had to keep going, picked up On the Road. After I was finished reading that, I picked up Big Sur, I think, and after that, moved on to some of his poetry. You can feel in his writing his zeal for life and the intensity of his spirit, and just in the text, his passion for the ideas contained therein. His novels are full of smoky Greenwich Village, San Francisco cafe bars with jazz musicians playing music hopped up on a variety of substances, just radiating the creative electricity of the time. If you haven't read him, I would recommend starting where I did with the Subterraneans short book, but it gives you a great taste of what he has to offer. Now, before I get to my number 1, I do want to offer a number of honorable mentions who I would say, while they didn't make it to my top 10, would probably be in my top 20 authors of all time. So here we go. Let me just run through these as quick as I can. At the top of the list, George R.R. Martin. And come on, who doesn't love Game of Thrones? Well, apparently a lot of people. I did read A Song of Ice and Fire and really enjoyed those, but I have not read any of his other works. I thought the books were incredible works of fantasy, but have not read any of his other works. But am curious to know from you if you would suggest that I should check out any of his other stuff. Next on the list, Hermann Hesse. I loved Journey to the East and Siddhartha, which respectively are a kind of mystical journey and a kind of sorta fictional account of the early life of the Buddha. Next is Craig Thompson, the Harvey and Eisner award-winning novelist who's most well-known for Goodbye Chunky Rice, Carnet de Voyage, and Blankets, all of which I devoured when I picked them up. If you love haunting, personal narratives about friendship, life, love, Habibi, his big, kind of thickest, largest work is also on my TBR. Also, Haruki Murakami, who's been critically panned recently, but I've thoroughly enjoyed his short story collections, which is really where I think he shines, in that more concise medium format. Also really enjoyed the colorless Tsukuru Tazaki and his Years of Pilgrimage. Now for something a little different, Rob Bell, the everyman former pastor from my hometown of Grand Rapids, Michigan, who's written several groundbreaking works that have shattered contemporary Christian thinking. Specifically Love Wins, which is a great book if you're looking for somewhere to start with Rob Bell, which is a book that claims hell does not exist. You can see why he is somewhat contentious in the world of religion. After leaving his church in Michigan and moving to LA, he and his wife have done a bit of stuff with Oprah, and he now runs a podcast called The Robcast, which only rarely, barely ever touches on Christianity, and is more focused on how to live well and tap into your inherent creativity. I've seen him speak in person once, and he's honestly hilarious. Cormac McCarthy is one who I really debated as to whether to include on this list for No Country for Old Men and his post-apocalyptic The Road, both of which have been made into films at this point. Now, I started reading Child of God back in 2013, read half of it, and it's a short book, but I just could not get any further into it, and it has been sitting on my currently reading on Goodreads ever since. He has a really unique style in his writing, which I can appreciate, but he is one of those love him or hate him, take it or leave it kind of authors. Last on the honorable mentions is Grant Morrison. Morrison is a unique one, most prolifically in the popular imagination now for his series Doom Patrol, which has been made into a television show. His graphic novels are hallucinatory, ecstatic works that border between the visionary, profane, and conspiratorial. I don't know how else to describe him, particularly The Invisibles, which I love The Invisibles, and All-Star Superman. Also enjoyed The Filth and We Three. Check out his stuff if you want something weird and different, particularly The Invisibles. And now the name you've all been waiting for, at number 1, J.R.R. Tolkien. I know, he's a lot of people's favorite author. Maybe I'm being a little tired saying that, but it's for good reason. He effectively invented the fantasy genre, and nobody else has written fantasy like him since. It is an experience to read his novels. I've only read The Hobbit and the 3 Lord of the Rings novels, but when I went through those in high school, I thought they were phenomenal and new, and I'd never read anything else like that. I will put up the claim that no other fantasy writer has held a candle to what he has done with Lord of the Rings. I mean, I do love the Peter Jackson films, of course. Did not think Amazon did as well with Rings of Power, though I know that's based on the Silmarillion. I would love to know from you guys if you'd recommend reading the Silmarillion, if I enjoy Tolkien. I'm not a huge Tolkien nerd like Stephen Colbert, but his writing is so phenomenal. He invented languages for his books. As you're reading Lord of the Rings, there are songs, the characters just break into song, and there is song in the text. You can sing the songs as you're reading the book. I mean, why not, right? There is another film with Nicholas Hoult playing Tolkien. I believe it's just called Tolkien, which is also kind of a cool biographical background on the man, and would recommend to anybody who's a fan of Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. If you haven't seen it and you don't really know much about John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, tell me what you guys think Do any of these top 10 authors land on your top 10 list as well? Would you recommend any other authors based on the names that I've listed here? I'm just very curious to know what you thought of this. That's a pretty good picture of me and what kind of books I like to read. Yeah, feel free to subscribe below if you enjoyed this. But that's it for today, and thank you all for watching.